First item on the agenda is the discussion of possible action on the June 8, 2020 Public Works meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
New business, discussion of possible action on approval of bids submitted by Pimber Companies in the amount of $146,376.90 for the 2020 sidewalk, curb, and gutter replacement program.
All right, well, so we received 2 bids for the, what we are calling a 2020 sidewalk replacement project. Like you said, there's sidewalk replacement and there's also curb and gutter replacement as part of this project. So we had 2 bids. The lowest bid was Pember Companies, so that $146,376.90. We got another bid from Standard Sidewalk of Blaine, Minnesota for $163,621.70. The engineer's estimate was $120,976 for this work. We kind of looked at the bids to see where the price was higher, and it was not in the concrete work, it was the patching in the street next to the curb sections that was really high. We feel pretty good about the prices for the concrete work itself were pretty good, so we feel comfortable with moving forward with the project so long as it makes sense from getting the money where it needs to come from. I feel that, you know, going out to bid again and all that good stuff because of the time of year and all, yeah, it's not going to be worth it to try again at this point in the year. So yeah, staff recommends moving forward with the lowest bid from Pember Companies for this work.
And then just to clarify the funding source, it's in your issue sheet. We do have some carryover monies from 2019 sidewalk replacement program. We didn't expel all that. We used that money to do the sidewalk inventory, and then we didn't use any of the remaining money. So there's approximately $35,000 remaining from 2019. We have $75,000 in 2020 appropriated to this project. And then along with the assessments associated with the project, we're very close to the base bid and the engineering cost of $160,000. If we do have any overages, we do have some monies remaining in that Hagan Street Trail fund as well in the CIP. The reason being is the bid came in considerably low on that project, so we were able to have some monies there. So I feel very comfortable with the monies that we do have available to move forward with this project, so recommending approval.
All right, staff has recommended that we accept the bid from Pimber Companies. Is there a motion?
I'd motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now the little item. Discussion regarding pavement and infrastructure pavement management plan draft.
All right, I put together a little presentation for this one. So I've been working hard on this one for the past few months to get this plan together. So just wanted to bring you guys up to speed on the stuff, the information we collected and what we're doing with that to move forward with hopefully getting a plan in place for proactive planning for our infrastructure management here. So that being said, what I'll talk about introduction, why I have a plan, talk about infrastructure Lifecycles, the current condition of our streets and utilities, and a proposed management plan. You guys all had the actual draft plan in your packet, so I don't know if you got a chance to look over all those pages of stuff, but this will summarize a lot of that, but if you have any questions at the end about particulars in the plan or anything that I present tonight, certainly let me know when we get to that point. So just a little bit of background. City of Hudson owns and maintains over 74 miles of streets and roads, 50 miles of sidewalks, and 12 miles of trails. Which is a lot. To this point, we haven't had a comprehensive analysis done of our infrastructure needs and a forward-looking plan to address those needs. It's been all kind of very reactive and kind of throw a dart at a dartboard, like this road looks bad, so we need to do something about it right now, kind of thing. I wanted to make sure we had a realistic view of what our infrastructure conditions and needs are, kind of here's where we currently find ourselves, here's what we need to do to move forward to keep our infrastructure in good condition or get it back to good condition. So process for developing the plan, first obtain data. I think that's the best start. Just make sure you're making informed decisions on the status of our current infrastructure systems. Secondly, determine life cycles of pavement and utilities so that we're not putting lipstick on a pig, so to speak, with putting our money towards things that are going to be useful for the long term. Determine ideal and realistic maintenance schedules. So, if we have a new road, make sure we can keep it that way in an ideal situation for the lowest cost possible. And then determine costs associated with proposed projects. So we can put this plan together and make sure we know how much it's going to cost to actually do it. And obviously these are all estimates and there's a lot of assumptions made, but we want to start somewhere with this. So why have a pavement infrastructure management plan? Lack of planning almost always leads to bad things, so to speak. I'm reminded of this Benjamin Franklin quote, if you fail to plan, then you're planning to fail. So I kind of feel that way with how our infrastructure is right now. If our infrastructure degrades, it just costs more in the long run to bring it back up to an acceptable condition. So we need to look at our infrastructure holistically as well. We can go out there and see a street that's falling apart, but we don't also look at the utilities underground. If we rebuild a street and the utilities are poor underground, then we're just back there in however many years to replace the utilities, and then we got to rebuild the street again. So that doesn't make any sense as far as cost saving and all that good stuff. So, and it also, it's people's lives that are interrupted by these projects too, so we want to make sure we keep that to a minimum because, if anybody's lived through a construction project, it's not fun for that year, so make sure you limit that as well. So talking about some life cycles of different types of infrastructure. First one would be asphalt pavement. With proper maintenance, you can get asphalt pavement to last up to like 60 years. Without proper maintenance, they can last as little as 20 years. So I like this graph on here. I can't remember where I found it at one point in time, but the solid line that kind of curves down, that's if you did nothing essentially to an asphalt pavement over time. Asphalt pavement deteriorates quickly. It stays good for a while and then it just kind of drops off the cliff. So if you can keep the asphalt in that good condition by doing things like seal coats and stuff like that, then you're in good shape for a long time. But if you let it get to the point where it's falling off the cliff, then you're talking about major expense, and we don't want to get there. So one of the reasons for having a plan is to make sure it doesn't get to that point. So concrete pavement with proper maintenance, you can, it lasts even longer than asphalt pavement can. Without proper maintenance, again, lasts less time. So curb and gutter as well. Usually the lifespan of curb and gutter is about 40 to 60 years. Concrete sidewalk is about the same. So keep that in mind. Utilities, if you routinely maintain as much as you can, utility pipe structures, etc., they can last for a long time before needing reconstruction. So if you, turn the valves on your water main, you line your sanitary sewer pipe, you remud the catch basin structure or whatnot, it can last for quite a while without needing reconstruction. But if you don't do those things, then you're constructed quicker, which is kind of the theme of the story tonight. So just keep that in mind. You can probably tell if you look at like the curb and gutter and sidewalk, it's like 40, 60 year time frame, and the utilities are about twice that essentially. So you kind of get this, there's two life cycles of asphalt or concrete per one life cycle of utility needs. So that's kind of a rule of thumb to think in the back of your head. So going to the current condition of our infrastructure, for pavement, there's a thing called the PACER rating, which you guys are probably familiar with at this point. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. So if you're in the 9 to 10 range, you don't need much, if any, maintenance, maybe filling a crack here or there, that kind of thing. It's usually for pavements that have just been reconstructed or just overlaid or that kind of thing. If you get into 7 to 8, pavement, you should probably start doing preventative maintenance like crack filling and seal coating to extend pavement life. Seal coating is good for, it kind of keeps the stuff underneath it in the state it's at for a longer period of time. So if you seal coat over a good pavement, it keeps it good for a while. If you seal coat over a bad pavement, it keeps it bad. So that 7 to 8 rating is kind of where seal coating gets the best bang for your buck. Yeah, you can seal coat newer pavements as well, and we do think that we should do that after our reconstruction projects as well, but definitely when you get to that 7 to 8, you want to get a seal coat on that to extend the pavement life. Start getting down to 5 to 6, you need kind of more reactionary maintenance. I call it more like a mill and overlay, so taking off the top layer of pavement, repaving it, that kind of thing. Start getting down to 3 to 4, you're kind of beyond that reactionary maintenance, but you can kind of buy some time before you need to reclaim or reconstruct by doing a mill and overlay to buy a few years, or something like a scrub seal. It's a different kind of seal coat. Then when you get down to the 1 to 2, you really reach the, you need to replace this like ASAP because it's going to turn into gravel pretty soon, that kind of thing. You get lots of potholes, you get all sorts of bad stuff.
Say,
going
Dean,
on.
before you
Yep.
go on, can
Yep.
you just inform the committee, it's like when we pave a new road and it's a 9 to 10,
Mm-hmm.
how many years will it typically stay that 9 to 10 range before it kind of moves into that next, there you go.
Well, this graphic kind of shows you that. It's a different scale, so it's a little bit different, but you're talking about probably
4 or 5.
5, 6, 7, something like that years.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 to 7 or so. Kind of depends on what the soil's like underneath, and there's different characteristics for each road. But if you lock that in by doing a seal coat at like year 4, usually you're kind of catching it before it gets kind of beyond that point.
And so that's why it's important that, the last couple of years we've been focusing on, like Wisconsin Street, which was done in, I think, 2015. So that's 5 years, Grandview will be coming up, Hanley. These roads that have been done just in this last 5 years to keep them, kind of keep in line what Gene is showing on that graphic. So just to give you an idea of why we are seal coating those roads. And I don't know, if people ask you, it's like, why are you maintaining these roads? There's other worse roads in the city. It's like, well, yes, there are, but there's other ways to maintain or improve those roads than just throwing money away. We want to throw our money and try to keep our good roads as good as it can for a longer period of time. And that's what that graph is kind of showing. So,
And I'll get back to that in a little bit too, just in the example that I did too. But it's like spend a dime on something rather than spend $1 on something else, kind of thing. It's all about allocating your money wisely. So this is kind of where we're at with our streets in our city for the current condition of our infrastructure, talking about the pavement surfaces. You can see we got a kind of a bell curve going on here with the average being right around that 5, which if you back up and you look at a 5 is half of our pavement is at needing a mill and overlay now or worse, essentially. So that's kind of a alarm bell going off, I guess, right now. We do have a fair amount that are still in the kind of the seal coat range, 6, 7, 8 pavements. We want to keep those there as much as we can, and keep them from getting to that 5 or lower, that kind of thing. But that's where we're at right now today, is at an average pavement rating of 5.2. So, and I don't know if some of you have this question, like, where should we be? What number should we be striving for? That's a good question. And I from what I've read in other communities that kind of strive for is kind of that 7 to 8 is kind of where you want the peak of your curve to be, so that most of your activities are more towards the preventative side of things rather than the reactionary side of things. So that's where to have everything be a 10 is not achievable, because you'd be repaving stuff every year to keep your pavement up at 10. But 7 to 8 makes a lot more sense as a realistic target for what we want to be. So getting into the nitty gritty of just to kind of show you where some of the trouble spots are for the current condition of our infrastructure. This is the downtown area. You can see a lot of oranges and yellows. That's kind of in the 3, 4, 5 pavement ratings. As you start getting into the greens and that kind of stuff, you're in the 6, 7, 8 kind of range. Gray and black are kind of the more newer pavements, such as Vine Street that we just redid last year. It makes sense to be up at a 10. You can see there's a lot of oranges and yellows out there, especially in the what I call the downtown area, the historic part of Hudson. There's a lot of pavement problems out there right now. Looking kind of towards the southwest corner of town, you still got kind of up in the 11th Laurel kind of neighborhood. There's a fair amount in that kind of 5-ish, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of pavement condition. As you start getting down into the industrial area, there's certain streets that are still up in the good range, and there's certain streets that are not. Like Industrial Street, we're milling and overlaying right now is I believe at 3 or 4. So once we mill and overlay that'll be up a better range. So just keep that in mind. And then southeast corner of town is in a little bit better condition because it's a little bit newer, but we want to make sure we keep it that way too. So over time, without adequate maintenance, the curve moves toward the left. As you can imagine, if you don't maintain even where we're at today, it just kind of keeps sliding to the left on the graph with the pavement conditions and stuff. And if we made more investments, to be sliding it to the right, which is a better direction to be going. This map is showing the magenta color, or purple, I guess it's kind of showing up on the screen, is pavement surfaces that are currently over that 60-year kind of lifespan. You can see a lot of our historic area has streets that are historic, so to speak, that are overdue for reconstruction. The peach color is kind of in that 40 to 60 years. They're kind of in that approaching their expiration date kind of time frame there. Moving kind of down south and west, same color scale. You can see kind of in that 11th Laurel neighborhood by EP Rock School. There's a lot of that time frame as well, and then even south of I-94, like Industrial Street and Hanley Road, there's some sections that are kind of approaching that time frame as well. And then this map is showing the utilities, red being utilities underground there's at least one utility is over 120 years old and overdue for reconstruction.
Dean, is that utility, do you mean water, sanitary, or?
It could be storm as well.
Okay.
And some
Kind of all the above?
Any of
Okay.
those, yep, exactly.
Okay.
Usually it's water, sanitary, that is, but, so red is stuff that's over 120 years old already. Right now, today, you can see that's a substantial portion of our downtown area. Orange, maybe doesn't show up very well on this map, but orange is kind of at that 100 to 120 years old, due for reconstruction time frame, and yellow is in the coming up soon within the time frame of what this plan looks out towards coming out due for reconstruction. So
Does the utility department have any plans?
I need to do a little bit more coordinating with them to exactly know what
Just
they're,
based on age.
yeah, this is just based on the age on the GIS system, what we've got out there, so.
I do know that the utility department did do a study recently as far as flows are concerned, especially when we're adding on a lot of the developments. And they have kind of pinpointed some areas that are areas of concern, where it's going to flows are going to kind of pinch at certain points, and they're going to be looking to redo some of those areas just to make sure that it doesn't happen. I believe Locust Street is one of them.
You're talking about for sanitary sewer
Yeah, for
particularly?
sanitary sewer, yep.
And I did reference the sanitary sewer plan from last year that
Okay.
has those spots within this
Yep,
plan
that's
as
what I'm
well.
referring to.
As outside of that plan, I don't know exactly what
Yeah.
what they're planning, I guess, at this point, but that would be something before we actually adopt this that we would want to make sure we've congealed our plans together to make sure we're all speaking on the same page here, so.
So speaking of that, I mean, as we confer with the utility department, obviously they have their own utility commission. Public Works has a Public Works Committee. What level of involvement does the committee want to have with the utility commission? Do you want to rely on staff to put together a plan based upon their needs and our needs and try and, jive them together? Or are the two committees going to want to convene at some point in time to discuss the future? Because what happens is, and I get a lot of phone calls, is, you get a resident that lives at a dead-end street or something like that, and when's my road going to be redone, right? And it's tough to prioritize those streets that don't see a lot of activity over streets that do. Obviously, life cycles of the sanitary water lines will come into play as this plan unfolds. So, I mean, you don't have to decide tonight, but I mean, that's something that we're going to want to think about in the future is how do we cooperate with one another so that we are on the same page with one another, and that we do agree upon a plan that we're going to adopt and follow over the next 20 to 30 years.
Yeah. So continuing on, there's a few more utilities that are getting old in the EP Rock area too. But mostly the utility issues are kind of in the downtown historic part of town. Other things we considered, missing or poor curb and gutter drainage situations. Obviously, we want to correct those if we have the opportunity to. Utility pipe types, a lot of pipes up until about the 1970s or so were, cast iron for water main and clay pipe for sanitary sewer, and those types of pipes have problems. It's brittle and prone to breaking essentially for both of those, and clay pipe is prone to damage from tree roots and all that good stuff.
It's amazing how long it lasts, though. Clay
It
pipe.
is surprising, yeah,
amazing.
exactly. So.
When we're digging, sanitary sewer lines are dug up and there's clay tile in there from 100 and some years ago, it's yeah, it is really impressive.
It's usually the joints in the pipes
Yeah.
that's the problem for the clay pipe for sanitary sewer.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. There's certain spots that are missing, water main loops, that kind of stuff. That would be things we need to identify with the water or the utility department. Like Mike was alluding to, the sanitary sewer plan, we've got that in here as well. Then talking about sidewalks and trails, we referenced the sidewalk and trail assessment. Obviously we've got sidewalks and trails missing in a lot of spots in town that we would like to see them there for safety and mobility issues. And in other parts of town, they're undersized and a safety issue for pedestrians that are especially mobility impaired. So we kept all those things in mind as we were developing this. So going towards actual, proposed management plan. So it's kind of maybe hard to see this, but I'll just kind of explain a few different options that we've been thinking about as we've been putting this together. So for an ideal asphalt pavement, so say like Vine Street we just redid, how do we keep that pavement extended for as long as it can possibly last? And there's a few different ways you can do that. First option would be to kind of adopt like a seal coat heavy plan, where you'd seal coat every 7 or so years, and then you'd mill and overlay after a certain amount of time. to get from year 1 to year 60. Option 2 would be to just do mill and overlays instead of seal coating, so you'd have essentially 4 mill and overlays before you'd reconstruct. And then option 3 would be do limited maintenance and rely on doing full depth reclamation, so just digging up the pavement and replacing it every 20 or so years. They're all options for getting to the same place. However, if you run the numbers on it, doing the option 1, the seal coat, is much more cost effective, and as we're talking about a lot of needs that we have, we want to make sure that we're as cost effective as we possibly can. This is just an example that I ran on Wisconsin Street that we just redid in 2015, I think Mike said, from 11th to Vine. And you add up kind of all the maintenance activities for option 1 with the seal coats, it's about a little over $411,000. If you did option 2, just the mill and overlays, it's about $477,000. If you just reclaimed it every 20 years, you're up to about close to, over $500,000, $548,000 to do that. So, in just this one, I don't know how long this stretch is, 3/4 of a mile or something like that, you've already saved essentially $130,000 by having a proactive maintenance schedule. So you just multiply that over the 74 miles of streets we have in town, and you're talking about major money if you.
So this is an important piece of the plan, is as a committee and as a community, as a council, we kind of need to decide what approach we're going to take to maintaining our streets, okay? Because there's some communities that won't even do a seal coat, right? They won't do option 1. They're not even touching it. They'll just do mill and overlay every, however many years. What is it? 10
to 15
10
years,
to 15
essentially.
years.
Yeah.
There's other communities, in the metro area that just do full depth reclamation every 20 years, and that's what they plan on doing. So you can mix and match based upon the area and what part of town you're in, but usually a community kind of decides as a whole, like, this is going to be our foundation for our program, and they don't really deviate all that much from it. At least that's what I've seen. And a lot of that is based upon past experiences with certain types of treatments, because, like, for example, Woodbury had a really bad stretch of seal coating where they had a lot of issues with it kind of spalling and coming back up, and they've kind of sworn that method off. There's some reasons, there's some thoughts on why it's happened there and not other places, but needless to say, they've sworn off seal coating, and they just kind of do a mill and overlay type program right now. And I don't know what Red Wing did, if they kind of did a mix and match, but
Red Wing, well, I can't speak for them right now, but essentially they did option 2, where it'd just be mill and overlays instead of.
yeah.
While I was there, the last year I was there, we just did our first seal coat in 20 plus years. The last year I was there to try it out, to convince people that, hey, we can do this, and it works out. They had a bad experience 20 years ago, and then just decided they didn't want to do it anymore, and changed the specs and figured out the problems, and we're like, okay, let's try this again and try it out. So.
Yeah. But as far as like, a staff recommendation, I don't know if Dean, you and I really haven't had a chance to discuss this, but I just because of the cost associated with option 1, I've been fortunate to have some success with seal coating, and I think the key is to get on those streets earlier in the years than later in the years. So what happens is if you wait till like year 7, 8, 9, you start to form that polishing on that surface, on that wear course, and then when you put down your oil and the rock on top of it, there's not a lot for it to stick to. It's like a polished surface, right? So if we can get on it year 3, 4, 5 a little earlier, and just the dollar cents, that's my recommendation as we move forward, be more proactive on the maintenance side, just because we can maybe stretch our dollars. And these costs are, obviously they're going to go up year after year after year. So that gap from option 1 to option 2, it's approximately $140,000 now. Well, maybe 5 years from now, it's closer to $200,000 gap, right?
Yeah.
The other thing too is what we're doing this year with our seal coating is we're actually seal coating, and then letting it sit for a few weeks, sweeping up the rock, and then we're coming over with a fog seal to kind of encapsulate that seal coat, which I think is, I mean, it does such a good job as far as just sealing everything in, and then you don't get that water penetration, so on and so forth, you know. But, I mean, I don't know your experiences.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
That would be my recommendation from staff.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would do if we end up going forward with the seal coat. The fog seal that's that extra layer of
Protection.
oil on top that locks it all together. That's worth its weight in gold to keep things from falling, the rocks from popping out and stuff. So
Yep.
anyway, yeah. it's
Does that
just-
make sense? Do you have any questions on that before we move forward?
Well, I'd like to just, in my mind, start, as I'm listening to the rest of this and figuring out how best to move forward. In a perfect world, we would have been doing option one for the last 20 years, and we wouldn't be sitting here at this table, you know, going, oh my gosh, how do we get to the point where we can even do option one?
Yep.
You know, that's what I see the challenge, because, you know, I can't speak for the other committee members, but from my perspective as, you know, as someone who maintains a home or other real estate I own, I operate my world on option one, you know. Something breaks, fix it now, you know, periodic maintenance of the major equipment. And you're better off in the long run, because too, then when it comes time to sell that thing, it's got the most value because it's been well maintained the whole time. But I think the challenge is, since we're so, you know, we're at 5.2 average on a scale of 10, and we really would like that to be at 8 to be able to have option one be an option. So in my mind, the question is, how do we push that?
Yep.
You know, what's a realistic goal to get us to a 7.5 or 8.0 average? And can we do that in 3 years? Can we do it in 4 years? You know, how long is that going to take? That's kind of where I'm
Yeah,
starting this thought process at.
Yep,
Yeah.
that makes complete sense.
And my only comment would be, I went to so when I first got in office, Wisconsin, or the League of Wisconsin Municipalities puts on like a training guide, more or less. And we had a big presentation on public works, and exactly what they said was, you know, it's much cheaper to treat it when it's a 7 or 8 on the pacer and do the seal coating and do the preventative maintenance than to just let it go. That you get more lengthy, you know, usage out of it. It's kind of the graph that you were showing. So what I'm saying is, that's not just one person's opinion, that's the whole state
Yeah.
experience with that, and so that really spoke to me. So I would think what you guys are saying makes sense to me.
Yeah. It is the more common option that you find cities doing. It's these unique cases, the outliers where they do have a bad experience, like a Red Wing or a Woodbury, where they kind of go away from it. But a majority, the communities that I've worked in have all done preventive maintenance, has been first and foremost. But like you said, Sarah, we got to get our roads to a condition where we can, and that's kind of why it is so important to the ones that we have done, stay on top of them while we try to catch up on the back end.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, so this would be like a thought exercise for, you know, maintaining Vine Street that we just redid. Now we can, you know, do option one on that, but Third Street out here is in a lot poorer shape, and we can't.
Yeah, we're not
we
seal
can't
coating
do
Third
this
Street,
for
yeah.
that right now.
Right.
We can do this for when we end up, you know, reconstructing or
Reconstructing.
whatever that street. But
Right.
this is kind of the, you know, as we get things to that good point, how to keep it there kind of thing. So, yep. We also have been thinking about concrete pavement instead of asphalt, and there's a lot of good things about concrete pavement. The kind of big drawback is that there's a higher initial cost. There's lower maintenance costs and a longer lifespan, but the higher initial cost is a hard thing to swallow, especially as we're considering how much needs we have right now. And we certainly, as staff, would be willing to look further into doing concrete pavement if there's interest, you know, from this committee or the rest of city council or anything. But we were developing this plan assuming that we were going to continue using asphalt streets due to the lower initial construction cost. We can talk more about that, I guess, as we go on here. So just wanted to to kind of break it down now for, each area of town.
Did you
Wanna
lose your
put that
input?
back on the, there we go. So on the downtown area, again, this is just kind of rehashing what we've been talking about. So here's another snapshot of our current infrastructure condition.
So just so Queenie knows, a lot of the downtown streets are actually concrete.
Underneath at least. yeah.
Underneath at least. Some have been overlaid over time, others are still concrete, but just so you're aware, a lot of, in the historical district are concrete pavement. So,
And again, our infrastructure down there is approaching its due date, and especially considering the infrastructure underneath. And essentially what I would say is any street that you see here shown in red, orange, or yellow, the only thing I'd recommend to do to those streets is whatever we need to do to prolong it to get to reconstruction time, because essentially all the utilities underground are going to have to get replaced in the not too distant future. So I wouldn't put a lot of effort into rebuilding the surface when the utilities are poor underground. So
in some preliminary talks with Kip, the utility director, I did ask him kind of what we were alluding to earlier about if the utility department has a plan, who's going to lead? Are we going to try and follow what the utility department wants to do, or are they going to try and follow what we're doing? So we kind of pick the streets that we're looking to do, and they'll say, yes, we want to replace the underground, or do we kind of work together as a team approach and try and say, this is a need for the utility department, this is a need for us, that makes sense, let's move forward with that project, right? So we have had some of those conversations already, Kip and I have, but no definite like 3rd Street, 4th Street, nothing like that has been talked about, so, sorry, dude.
yeah, no, that's fine. So just a little synopsis then of the general plan for the downtown area. In this plan, I assume there's a 15-year kind of cycle of full reconstructions to replace all the infrastructure from top on down in the downtown area, since you can see all the colors on the map here. In 15 years, if we did 10 blocks a year, essentially that would do that whole area, except for First, 7th, Vine, and Wisconsin that have been done more recently, and those would just be maintained per the management plan. And then the 3rd and Laurel, kind of from Walnut all the way up around the corner, that needs a full depth reclamation in order to get that back to ideal, so to speak, because you can see there's some issues up there. So southwest area, so in talking about the older industrial park, Meadman Farms, EP Rock area, again, here's the pavement infrastructure that's out there right now. Again, here's how we're approaching the lifespan of these surfaces, and then a few utility age issues. So the general plan for the southwest area, there's a lot of surface reconstruction that's needed for a lot of the streets, and particularly the area kind of bounded by Laurel, Blakeman, 17th, Cooley, kind of the EP Rock neighborhood. A lot of those streets are in that kind of 40 to 60 year window right now, and so they'll be coming due for reconstruction in the not
So
too distant future.
explain what surface reconstruction is compared to full depth reclamation.
So full depth reclamation is just replacing the pavement, essentially grinding up the existing pavement all the way down to the gravel, and just repaving it, leaving the curbs alone apart from replacing spot pieces and whatnot. Surface reconstruction, essentially, replacing the pavement, but also replacing the curb and gutter, sidewalks, kind of the more complete package, except for the stuff that's actually underground. So it'd be all the things you can see on the surface would be reconstructed.
Good.
That would be the same thing for Industrial Street, Namacoggin, River Ridge Road, and portions of Hamley and Hagen. Many of the industrial park streets will eventually need full depth reclamation because they're kind of in that, kind of beyond the point where milling overlaying would be a good idea right now. And then we're kind of aiming to keep the larger, busier streets like Crestview, Carmichael, Hagen, and Hamley in good shape as long as possible, avoid big costs later. So as I think Mike was alluding to before he started this meeting, if you can only imagine having to try to rebuild Crestview Drive and how awkward and confusing that would be and expensive, we want to avoid that situation if at all possible. So same thing with Carmichael. I can only imagine what that would be like when we have to rebuild it, but hopefully a
Although
long time from
we
now.
probably have a lot of energy now to tackle that. Can you imagine in 20 years trying to tackle that, you and I?
Yeah, we wanted to avoid that. Kind of the northeast area, Grandview, Carmichael by the middle school area. I didn't show the condition of this area before, but it's a newer part of town, so the pavement is in a better shape. We don't have as many utility issues. So the general plan is replace curbs where they need to be replaced in the Hunter Hill, Stone Pine areas, and then maintain the rest of the streets as much as possible, following the plan as we can. And then the southeast area, again, is kind of a newer part of town. The Red Cedar Canyon and Heritage Greens area is kind of in that 6-ish pavement condition window. The Coach Light area is a little bit worse. Down in the industrial park, the conditions are worse as well because of, trucking and all sorts of stuff. And they're older than the Red Cedar Canyon area as well. So the general plan would be in the industrial park, reconstruct the surface on kind of the west half, so to speak. So O'Neill and kind of westward would be reconstructed at some point, and then maintain the east half to keep it in decent shape, and then maintain the other streets per the plan. So, and here's the point where, what we're putting dollar signs to.
Where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, and the dollar signs are large, I can tell you that right now. And, when we put together this plan, we're trying to be, not making a plan to fit our budget, essentially, or trying to make a plan that, if we had the money, we could do,
Right.
and it would get us to the point that where we needed to go. And so, these are estimated costs. These have a lot of assumptions made. The costs include all the, for full reconstructs, utility replacements underground, it includes
that-
seal coats, mill and overlays, et cetera, et
Okay.
cetera. Yep,
So it's everything,
it's everything.
not the street piece of it.
Yep, it's everything.
That helps.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch. What's the difference between the two columns?
Oh, so I didn't touch the two columns yet. The first column is if you didn't include special assessments in the kind of calculation. And then the second column is if you included, so you subtracted out what we would get back for special assessments, and estimated anyway. So the special assessments allows us to recover some of the money, and kind of depending on how the policy changes, if it does, that number can change, that kind of thing. So I wanted to give everybody kind of a before and after kind of thing, because
Got it.
that can change. So like I was saying, this number is like all inclusive: utility replacements, seal coats, mill and overlays, curb and gutter, sidewalk replacement, ped ramps, everything in the time that it's supposed to be happening, essentially. And these numbers, I had to make a lot of assumptions, like this street was reconstructed in this year, and that street was seal coated in that year, kind of thing. So the projects and numbers can move around. It can get some of the peaks and valleys can get flattened out. All sorts of stuff can happen with this. But just wanted to give everybody kind of like a general range of what we're looking at for this kind of stuff.
So also to give us a general range, where have we consistently been falling? Like, what has been our annual expenditure?
Well, maintenance.
I mean, I know it hasn't been
Maintenance is-
enough, but
Maintenance is 230,000 every year. As far as reconstruct goes, the projects have varied, but it's been, like this year we spent 450. Last year it was Vine Street, and that was
So
about
it's
$1 million,
$1.5
but
or
half of
something.
that was covered by a grant, so it was about $500,000 for the streets portion. Before that, Grandview, I don't know what total cost of Grandview was. Deb, do you recall?
Usually range right around 400 or 500.
400 or 500. But it's kind of seems to be, at least the last few years, it's around 500 to 700
And if you add the 230 onto it, you're kind of approaching maybe $1 million that
total.
Yeah, max out.
we're spending on.
we have a,
But that doesn't include any utility work, which this
Yes.
spreadsheet does include.
Yep, so that left column does include like Jim said, all the sanitary, water, so Kip could cover half of that cost on that. If not.
I think we should have them cover a little bit more than
No, I'm just teasing.
Yeah,
I'm teasing, Kip.
So, when we're talking about how to fund these projects, some of it is gonna be coming back from utility stuff as well, but, not all of it is that. But, so anyway, where do we go from here?
Yeah. We don't show this chart.
Right?
So, we'll, as I kind of get done with this slide, we'll talk about any questions, comments, concerns that we can incorporate into the plan. Like I said, we'll have further coordination before we get to that point as well. Just wanted to bring up, how we kind of started talking about this, how to pay for needed maintenance. Right now, our assessment policy essentially ends up covering about 5 to 10% of project costs for reconstruction and that kind of projects. It doesn't touch seal coats or most of a mill and overlay project unless you start replacing curb on it. So
Like industrial this year, we are doing some spot curb repair, which is accessible back to the property owner. So
But the
that-
pavement replacement itself is not.
Yeah, pavement is
So
not.
there's some.
But
potential-
even during a full reconstruct, the pavement portion is not accessible per our
Correct.
current assessment policy.
So we're kind of thinking about making some updates to that policy. Obviously, we'd be talking about this a lot more in the future, but I think that those are coming as well. A lot of this stuff will probably be this plus this plus this, kind of getting to where we need to go. Grants obviously will be keeping our eyes peeled for anything that will help us to get there. And since we're in a hole, we'll probably need help getting out of it as well. So, yeah. And then I just wanted to also touch on how to keep us from getting here again. Well, having a plan in the first place helps us to keep us from getting here again and following it. We also need to make sure that when we're building streets and stuff, that we have the tax base generated by it to pay for it. Essentially, you can't have stuff that's not producing its weight essentially to keep the infrastructure up. So
Yeah.
we need to make sure we're keeping an eye on that. There's a lot more you can say about that, but
Yeah. Before we go too far into the weeds
Yeah.
on discussion, just one thing that Dean and I are doing this year that we haven't done in the past is the newer developments that are going in. For example, Bella Rose. Okay. Typically in the past, like in Carmichael Ridge, the developer would put down the base course of asphalt, then they would wedge the outsides against the flag line of the curb, and only when the capacity reached, I believe it was 75% of that development was filled in, that they would mill off that wedge, and then they would pave the wear course, all right, and then the city would accept it in. So instead of doing that approach, what we're trying to do this year, and like I said, Bella Rose, an example, is we're allowing the developer to put the base course of asphalt on and the wear course of asphalt on at the beginning without any occupancy percentages. But then we're also having them fund that seal coat, that first seal coat in that 5-year window, so that the city doesn't have to pay out for that maintenance program at that point in time. That'll already be covered under the DA. So we know we're gonna have a nice, healthy road for at least the first 10 years of that development. And then we can spend our money. So in 5 years, we won't have to be seal coating that. It'll come from the development, and we can put our monies towards other parts of the city that need it. So that's something that we're trying this year, just because we're running into a lot of issues with developers and fighting over, milling up the wedge, and it's an added cost to the developer, and then they're nicking the curb and they're having to replace curb because we don't want bad curb when we're taking it online. So just to let you know, we are trying that approach.
any
Sounds
little
good.
bit helps. So anyway, yeah, thoughts, questions, concerns, whatnot. It's a lot to take in, I know, and we wanted to at least get the conversation started tonight, because obviously this is going to be a conversation that will continue for a few months anyway, before we get the plan into place and whatnot. But just wanted to start it here tonight, so.
The first thing I get is that we need a philosophy of how we're going to maintain our streets. And the one piece I heard is the new streets, the arterial streets, is that we absolutely try to keep them at the 7 to 8 level as long as we can. That's the one thing I heard. Now, I don't, at least, and that's always made sense to me. Mike, you've been telling me that for as long as you've been here. So I'm certainly in agreement with that. But how do we then? I mean, these numbers. I think even with the utilities, these numbers don't fly.
Yeah.
There's just no way that we can be looking at dollars like this. It's more in our budget, you know. So our total annual budget. So. What's the next phase of that? Do we have a minimum, like we want everything to be a 5 or better, or is that some kind of cutoff point, or how do we? What are some other approaches we could take to? We're in a hole. How do we start digging out of the hole, and how do we keep other pieces from going into that hole? So that's my question, and I don't know if there's a.
We're in a pickle. I mean, this is and this conversation is not new. I remember listening to previous councils, even before my time and John's time even, that we have 74 miles of roads, I think was the number, streets and roads. So if we want to maintain them, 20 miles a year, or 5 miles a year, what's the magic number? So that each one's getting
Touched.
Yeah. And getting it. So that's your magic. You could go do math there. And the only one solution that would help reduce the numbers in that chart, you achieved that project by 2040. So that was 20 years. And I think if you were to make it 30 years, maybe, where does that pull the numbers in? What does it fall in? Can we then afford that? Or is it 40 years? Is it going to take us 40 years to get us back on track? I'll be 95. Dang proud of what I did on city council. So, that's that. I mean, we have to know the budget. What is our tolerance for spending? And then you need to tell us, at that very greatly reduced.
Do we, I know, Jim, you've mentioned this in the past about making a formal presentation to council, right? And just kind of reiterating the position that we're in, kind of like what you alluded to, that it's been done in the past, but try to get, if we could even get like a set kind of dollar amount to play with every year, if that's 1 million or if it's 2 million or if it's 750,000 and that's kind of what the number is, then we can kind of, obviously, if we stay closer to that million, the plan is just going to push out, like you said, Sarah, 40, 50 years, right? And people are just going to have to live with some streets that aren't in really good condition. That's just the reality of the position that we're in. But I don't know if that's the approach we take, instead of bringing them the chart that says we need X amount, $15 million, over the next 20 years to get our roads in shape. Obviously, they're going to balk at that. Maybe not, but no. But what do you think is the appropriate approach to council to try and increase our funding for not only reconstruct but maintenance, and B, what's realistic, or how do we make that, a possibility come to fruition, I should say. Do you have any thoughts on how to best do that? Because, if we brought this chart to, if we made the same presentation to council, as much as Dean has spent putting this together, right? It's a tough pill to swallow, right, when you see that chart,
Absolutely.
right? And we want to make it where, it is feasible for us to put a plan in place, whether it is 20, 30, 40 years, maybe it is 40, maybe it's 50 years, but at least we have something in place.
Right.
Because right now what we're doing, and like Dean alluded to, is we're kind of I don't know how we picked what streets to do in the past, but it seems, I don't know if it's just based upon complaints that we've received, or if there's an actual like justification or reasoning why why we did Vine Street, why we did Wisconsin Grandview of Industrial, you know, or is it just kind of, oh, we got 10 complaints, so we'll put that one on the list in 2022. You know, how have we derived, how have we come to this point?
Do you know a history of that, Jim? You've been here the longest.
No, I don't. You know, it's, I was surprised when Grandview got redone, and I live on Grandview. So it was, you know, other than the fact it is a major arterial street and is going to carry more and more traffic as when we rebuild Carmichael, it's
Yeah.
going to carry a lot of traffic. So, and we're seeing more traffic on that street, so that's why it probably needed to be done. So I don't think there's been a real philosophy around that, that something that we could say, here's our approach. Now we're trying to create a philosophy. Here are we're going to keep our arterials at the 7 and 8 level for as long as we can. Maybe that's one thing. And then we're going to, I don't know, spend $500,000 a year on the 1, 2, 3, 4s. And start picking those off the list. And then the 230,000 is on the
Keeping
it's gonna take
everything
more
up.
money
Yeah.
to do what we want to do.
Yeah.
So that we're going to have to come with an approach like that. I mean, obviously, you know, this is great.
Absolutely, good work.
And this chart needs to have the utilities
They break
just
it out a
pulled out
little
of
bit
it,
more.
so, or
Yeah.
something separated out so we can see
Sure.
what's truly the public works piece of this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's,
Yeah.
but I think we're also gonna have to look at funding sources. I don't think anything less than $500,000 a year is gonna touch the projects that we need to do.
Right.
That's just a gut guess based on the numbers I see here, is that we need that just to start creeping out of the hole.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Deb, do you have any history in your head about how the priorities were made and which streets we did?
Well, yeah, we created a plan, usually, same thing like this, and unfortunately, we were only allowed, $450,000 a year, and so then we break it out into seal coating and maintenance, and then if we wanted to use it for a bigger project, we wouldn't do as much seal coating, so we could use it for that, so.
Okay. So it's just been under a really
It's been,
tight
yeah.
budget.
And
for
I'd
so
say
long.
that's
Is
been
that
in
right?
place for at least 10 years, I think that number's been, at 450, and that was for, or 600, I should say 600, 230 for maintenance and 450 years for whatever.
So no cost of living increase or anything on
It
that?
just was straight across the board. It was kind of similar to that, took it out, divided it, it was a start. Now the technology's changed so much, so it's, a lot better to,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wisconsin
but
Street
it's never
probably-
changed.
Wisconsin probably got redone because we're able to, that's a street going to a school, and we're able to get a lot of grant money for Wisconsin Street. So that made it an easy choice. It's a big street, and it needs to be, but
Yeah.
we got a lot of money for it, so we were able to
Yeah.
swing that one.
Right. Same thing for Vine Street, that second phase, half of that was grant funded as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I will say that, yeah, it's great to get grants. And obviously you guys are the policymakers, but I'm just gonna throw this caveat in here that we also, we as a city, I think, need to make sure that we're not relying on some nebulous out there, somebody else to solve
Funding our
problems
streets, yeah.
sometimes. So,
Yep.
I think we will need to make sure that we think about how to fund our own, or solve our own problems too at some point. Grants are great, they can't always get them, so we gotta make sure we move on too, so.
Well, I'd for one like to see us leaving the future in better shape than it was left for us,
Yeah.
I guess a couple of my suggestions, just at first run through on this would be, perhaps to, on your chart, I saw a lot of, there were some really big years and some flatter, some smaller years. If you could make some adjustments into
Yep.
the streets chosen, so that was more of a consistent number,
Sure.
it might be easier to sell. If we knew that annually, and there weren't all these ebbs and downs. Maybe stretch it over that 30 years, as I had mentioned, because those numbers are just, it's just not gonna happen.
Sure.
So we want it to be realistic,
Mhm.
so we can say in 30 years, this is what we're gonna leave behind. This is the legacy of Public Works we're gonna leave to that future generation. And I'd also like to know what is that number that it would have been if it had adjusted for inflation from the 2008 or whatever year that started, where we had that flat number for 10, 12 years. Well, let's take that number through a financial person and know what we should have been spending had we been keeping up every year with inflation. And then we'd be at a number today that was chosen in 2008 that might be a little bit closer to the number we need.
Yep.
So those are all my,
Yeah. Can I piggyback on that 1 second? It's so the I alluded to back in the downtown area here. Let's back up a second. I had assumed a 15-year kind of plan to replace all the downtown streets. If we stretch that out to 30, like, or in that ballpark, that what you're saying, that will significantly reduce the costs in the first, especially the first 10 years or so of what's on that plan there. Obviously, it's kind of deferring things, so long term it's maybe more expensive, but given our realities, that may be the route we have to take to, get people on board with doing it. And then, maybe we do come up with a plan that, here's our acceptable for our arterial street, make sure that's kept up, and then that's a 8, and then a residential cul-de-sac is a 5 or something like that, because it doesn't see as much traffic and it's not as much of a communal benefit as the arterial street is, or something like that. So there's ways we can flatten this out. I want to say too, in 2025, I'm assuming that's when Carmichael gets rebuilt, and we're heavily going after grant stuff. This is north of 94. Heavily going after grant stuff for that. Obviously, you guys know that we applied for the build grant for the planning and getting up to the construction document phase, and then hopefully, again, applying for that same thing to actually construct it. So that's kind of in that. That's where you see that really big number in that year. I had to kind of throw it somewhere, so that's where I threw it. And obviously, if the federal government pays for 80% of that, that certainly takes a bite out of that number too. So that doesn't totally absolve all the issues that we've been talking about, but I just wanted to say that there's a few things that we can do to change the numbers downward a bit. So.
My comments, first of all, Dean, thank you for an awesome job. That's a ton of work, then ton of hours. I can see that went into that. I was overwhelmed when I read it, because I was like, wow, this is a guy that knows what he's doing. He's thinking through every single detail and every order, and I really appreciated it.
thank
I
you.
thought the work you put in was it was a labor of love for the city, basically. My thoughts, I guess, the numbers aren't probably feasible. However, I like what Sarah's saying about stretching it out to the 30 years. I think that makes sense. I also think, as I look at it, I think I would like more communication and cooperation with the Utilities Commission. So whether that's you and Kip, or whether that's us sitting down with them, I think it would be a good service to the city if we did that at some point, to say, what are the priorities? From what I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dean, it seems to me an obvious starting point is downtown, because the infrastructure under, as well as the roads above, they were all, I forget the color, rather orange or whatever it was. So And then the other thought I had on that is downtown is currently a TIF district, right? So we've already set that aside. So there should be monies available that we can put into that from, that's a already set up, theater TIF district, right? The other thought I had is, there is gonna be money in the future. There's gonna be like when St. Croix Meadows eventually comes offline and some of the other developments, right? I don't know what years that's gonna be, but there's gonna be a chunk of money that the city can use for certain things. So I think this plan that you have developed is super helpful because it essentially, it gives us a roadmap for where to go for all kinds of things. So that's just invaluable. And I think we can adjust the numbers and look at kicking it back. But as far as what are the streets and what are the infrastructure that needs to happen, I mean, you've basically laid it out. I would say there's a good chance too in the future. There'll probably, I can't speak for the federal government, but I want to say that I think infrastructure nationally is going to be more of a priority. And so there may be federal, funds coming in the future. I don't know what year that's going to be, but down the line, I'm hoping. And then the other thing I would say is, I think the 230,000 is just ridiculously cheap for what we've been putting into maintenance. If you look at what other cities are doing, even when I went to that training I was talking about, they were like, public works is like one of your most expensive things. It hasn't been in Hudson. And so I think we should be bold and say, we need to put up a good proposal. It's obviously in the middle of COVID-19, the timing is not great because we don't have a great sense. But I think if we can construct some priorities and sort of say, here's what we think we need, and in conjunction with public utilities, I think that's a great case, not only just annual budget and maintenance, but bonding. We just bonded $6 million for a new fire station because we needed it. It was old. We bonded, 12.7 million or whatnot for the sewage treatment plant because it's old. Our streets and our infrastructure is old. So I think we make the same argument, and I think the point that we take to council at some point is if we put money in it now, we save money in the future. So would you want to pay up front? Do you want to do some bonding right now? And we're going to take $2 million out or whatever it's going to be to get this going. Or do you want to pass this off to the next generation you were talking about? So I think there's a lot of ways to work it. But I think this is a huge resource that you put together that we can really, again, sort of construct that future with public utilities and then looking at funding sources. So I'm certainly willing to go to bat for bonding and what we need. We have the need, and I think part of it's public awareness, right? We I don't know, it's not a glamorous thing to talk about, right? It's not it's not as easy as pointing out we need a new fire station, right? But everyone uses the road, so it's something that we all have a need for. So just a couple thoughts.
Thanks, Paul.
I certainly have to echo the depth of the work that's been done here. We really understand where we're at, and we've kind of, well, it's just been depending on who the latest phone calls were from, perhaps, and that's not ignoring that, but everybody thinks that their street needs to be better. So this will put it on a more technical basis for us, as understanding that and tying it in with the utilities. Like that's really, really critical. The other thing that's been poking around, I saw this in the municipality magazine, is a street maintenance utility tax. You create a utility, and then the taxes do not affect our levy limit. So, and it can only be spent on street maintenance, it can't be spent on plowing, but which we can easily separate that. That's not an issue. And I don't know what the appetite would be for that, but it certainly is a way of us getting money without having the big fight around the levy limit piece. And that can be defined. It could be limited. It could be, we could create it for a 5-year period of time or whatever. But that would depend, and we'd have to put a case together. And I think it'd take the entire staff putting that case together as to what would work. How does that really work? I mean, I read a little bit about it, so I know enough to be extremely dangerous, but it's an option, and it gets us out of this levy limit disagreement that we have every year, or not a disagreement, wall that we run into every year. So that's the other piece, is how do we fund these things without, the TIF district is certainly a potential, so we need to do some real digging with the financial piece of that. I think that, bringing something like this to the council is, if you don't have somebody, Mike, if you know where the money's coming from, it goes right on through. If you don't, you're asking for more money, then you really gotta explain and justify. So much more, because now you're asking for something that doesn't exist.
Right.
So,
So would you like to see Dean to push that chart out to 30 years? And then the other thing I'm hearing is maybe we identify those arterial streets and put those on kind of almost like a separate maintenance schedule, just to make sure that we're keeping those in the best shape as possible, keep them in that 7, 8 range.
Yeah, well, once they get the, reconstruct, once they're in that range,
Yeah.
absolutely, we have to maintain them. I'm
Yeah.
100% in agreement that,
that's an interesting, I put all those on tier 1.
yeah, it's almost
And
like
then
you
as
have a
we
whole nother.
bring the others up to
set it
stuff, then
to
they
go.
move them into that.
Right.
That might be a good way to move there.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting thought.
So, okay.
And all those other suggestions as well.
Well, like what you alluded to is it's challenging, because you receive phone calls, I receive phone calls, people, they pay a lot of taxes in Hudson, right?
Yeah.
And their streets deteriorating, and how come my street's not being redone, resurfaced? And those are very challenging conversations, and basically I tell them to call their district rep. You're welcome. I need more funding. I can do anything you want. I just need more money. But yeah, it's tough. It is. We're behind, and it's.
Well, we've been underfunding it for quite a while, is what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So.
That, your suggestion about looking at how we funded over the last 10 years or whatever, it's 15 years, and if it's been at a steady level,
Yeah.
what we've spent, and if we had inflation included in just the $230,000,
Yeah.
it would probably be double that.
Today could be 400,000, that would have
Yeah.
made a huge difference all those years with where we're at today, where now we're at 5.2. I just see that's unacceptable for a community of our, we're rather affluent, most of us.
The other thing too is it'd be interesting, I can reach out to communities our size and see what their annual maintenance budget is, just to, compare to apple to apples, because we always like to kind of see what other communities, in that 15,000 population range are doing for their, maintenance of their streets. So I think that'd be an interesting piece of the puzzle too.
Well, and if you're gonna reach out and get that information, would you also be able to, since they have to by state mandate do this type of assessment, do they know their average? Do they know their 5.2?
Yeah,
Perhaps, you could ask them.
Other communities, I bet, probably know what their, our 5.2 is their 6.1 or 4.7 or
Right.
something like that.
It would
but-
just be curious if you
Yeah.
find out what their maintenance plan is, what their maintenance budget is, and what's their current average.
Yeah.
That'd be really great, just to kind of
Yeah,
see.
where we stack up. Okay.
Good work.
I think we're good.
I appreciate the feedback, and yeah, we'll do some tweaking and more coordinating, and come back in a little bit and give you an update, so.
Okay, we don't have any old business. We have some project updates. The 2020 Street Improvement Project, Mill and Overlay.
So Right now, what's happening is if you drive on Industrial and Stage Line, the phase of the project, they're replacing curb and gutter sections, spot repair of that, doing the storm sewer repair work. And after they get that work completed, then they'll come in and do the mill and overlay of the actual asphalt pavement. So that's kind of the phase that they're on. They're running a little behind just because of some of the traffic flows on Stage Line, challenging spot to work. Kind of what we alluded to earlier about working on major arterials, but it's coming along. I mean, they have a reasonable amount of time yet to complete it, so that's kind of the stage that they're at right now.
Yep. Their contract says they need to be done before Labor Day, so they're still on track to hit that.
Yeah.
It's been really rainy lately too, so that's kind of slowed them down a bit too. So.
Yep.
But they're still on track to get there. It's just a little later than what they had initially planned. So.
Okay. The 2020 street maintenance program.
We are having a pre-construction meeting with Farner Asphalt tomorrow, so we'll have a little bit more idea as to what the schedule is, but they again also have that kind of Labor Day completion date. Their work is going to go a lot quicker than the mill and overlay project just because of the nature of the work, so we're anticipating it'll be like kind of a 2 to 3 week project rather than a month and a half project kind of thing, so we're not too worried about it yet, at least unless for something changes. We haven't started this at our next public works meeting, then we'll be a little bit more nervous about it. But,
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about the start date, because 2 years ago, was it? Their other projects kept getting delayed, and they just pushed us out to where we didn't get anything done.
Right. Yeah,
So-
carried over to the next year. Yeah.
Don't want that to,
Yep.
I don't know how we relay that message to them, but that can't happen again.
The dollar sign is what relays in that message, because we have I can't remember how much it is per day that they go past their completion date. It's something like $1,000 or something a day, calendar day, after August 28th. If they don't get it done, then they get that deducted out of their check. So that speaks volumes to contractors. They're humans, they have to make a profit, so sometimes that's what has to happen, but yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that we need on here for future agendas? There was quite a bit of information on the other projects that we have, and maybe next time looking at the sidewalk and piece in the future, looking at the alleys, that's kind of looks like a piece that we could bite off and actually take care of, but again, it's just another $100,000 or so what the heck. But take a look at those. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah.
I mean, this is what we got here is a really nice primer on how you define it, and this is great. This is the best information I've seen, best compilation. And it was really almost parts of this. Oh, that's what they mean. Yeah. So yeah, and then the description of the other projects was really good. So we just need to bring that to the forefront and say, what are we going to do with it now?
Yeah.
We've got the project defined. Are we going to say, nah, let's wait till next year, or are we going to start working on it, or what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Particularly like the alleys, for example, I think there's some of those that absolutely need to be done.
Yeah, alleys are big. Yes, the assessment policy needs to be looked at holistically from the city's point of view, moving forward, what we want to do with the alleys, what we want to do with sidewalks, so on and so forth. Some of the current policies are lack of a better term, a hindrance to some of the reconstruction of some of these pieces of infrastructure. But I mean, something to look at in the future too. The other thing that wasn't on the project update that I do want to include is Vine Street adjacent to Bellow Rose. We do have a meeting out there on Thursday, staff does, and a schedule will be set to start reconstructing that portion of the road from basically the lift station to the Carmichael intersection, and then expanding the Carmichael intersection to the north. So that work will be taking place prior to our next committee meeting. Staff, after our meeting on Thursday, will have a better idea on the timeline and schedule. We'll be drafting a letter which will go out to a lot of the area residents to let them know that, you know, Vine Street will need to be shut down during that portion of the project, just because of having to lift basically the entire road up 4 feet. There's no way to stagger that. So we're gonna be shutting it down and probably using Grandview as a detour route, as that is kind of the main arterial through the north to the south. But just so you know, that is coming down the pipeline here rather quickly. And we anticipate probably that project starting here the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
We want to get it done before school.
Yeah, they're shooting, yeah, we'll know more on Thursday, but
Yep.
they were planning on starting probably in about a week and a half or so from now. And we'll see if that's the case here. They were waiting on the new lift station in the Belrose development to get that up and running before they started on Vine Street, because that has to happen first. But now all that's in, they just have to get power to it and then make sure it works before they send the sewage down that direction, and then they can shut down Vine Street. So,
But we're gonna have to have signage up, you know, I think in the sign plan, the detour plan, you know, we'll have signs up at least, you know, 2 or 3 days before the detour takes in effect, so people will kind of get an idea that, hey, this is coming down, you know, just let you know, find alternate routes and so on and so forth. So, I mean, it'll be an inconvenience, right, for about a month, month and a half, month. But just let you know that is happening soon.
yeah,
Yeah, great.
aiming to have that done by the time school starts up again as well. So,
Yeah. That's all I got.
Great. Thanks for reminding me about that.
Yep.
Is there anything else, for the next meeting?
Could we get some information on the beach maybe too, with, is it the E. coli levels or the testing? Do we know anything about the?
Yeah, so after that initial, I can do it right now. So after that initial reading where it was in the advisory level at 345, I did contact St. Croix County Public Health. About a week later, they did come back out and retest the beach area. The count was considerably less. It was a count of 45 on the north side of the beach and 8 on the south side of the beach. So that 345 day was just a bad testing day or a bad testing location. But since then, those levels have returned back, and I'm expecting what St. Croix County Public Health told me is they kind of test around the holidays, so Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, and so I'm expecting them to come into the community here in the next few days and retest again, and we'll get updated levels.
Okay,
So,
sounds good.
yep.
I got nothing. I would move to adjourn.
Yeah.
Well, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.